I've finally released a big board. It's been a long wait, but who do I have at the top and where am I off base according to James? Find out next on Locked On NBA Big Board. Hello and welcome into Locked On NBA Big Board. I'm Leif Thulin. I'm joined by James Barlowe, better known as Draft Junkie James, and we're going to go through my big board. He and I have both taken a look at it, and we're going to kind of break down where I've got some kind of abnormal picks, or does he agree? And we haven't actually talked about it much at all, so this should be an interesting kind of discussion / debate. But enjoy, you guys, and I'm excited to see your guys' reactions, and I'm excited to be here with James.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. All right. Without further ado, I'm just going to go 1 through 3, and we'll kind of start at the top. And it's Alex Sarr, Rob Dillingham, and Ron Holland. Let's start with Sarr. Where do you kind of have him on your board? And if there's any hesitation, let me know as to why.
I have Sarr number 1 on my board. He's been number 1 on my board for basically the entire year. You don't want to leave it as just that, especially with kind of what happened with Scoot last year. But like, he left such an imprint with that in that game against the G League Ignite, and then you see the talent. I want to buy him as a guy that's going to be able to stretch the floor, play defense, be an athlete. And, in this draft, I feel like he is not just because he's the safest pick, but I also feel like he has the most upside. So you're not going to get any argument from me there on Sarr. But tell me why you have Sarr number 1.
Yeah, so Sarr for me is 1, but actually just narrowly over who I have 2. And I'm sure that one will be a little more debated. But my rationale for Sarr is defensively, he's likened to the defensive player of the year last year, Jaren Jackson, or a guy that I deem to be a better defender than Jaren Jackson, and Jonathan Isaac, meaning that he's got a center size, but the fluidity and mobility to guard wings. And so I think defensively, he can be an excellent player from day one. Offensively, you see the flashes, like you mentioned in that game, that you just can't unsee against G League Ignite. When it was supposed to be the showcase for Ron Holland and Matas Buzelis, it was Alex Sarr's showcase. You see him play on a team in Perth that I would say doesn't play a brand conducive to showing his biggest strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And he was still able to be effective. Like, yes, the numbers don't jump out of the screen, 10 and 5 effectively rounding up there. But what he does well is he can finish near the basket. He's got good fluidity with the ball. And I think his jump shot, not that I want to bank on that as a big time skill that he has right now. I think that can be developed. And if you give me a guy with all NBA defense potential, with the potential to put the ball in the basket on short rolls or as a lob threat with the potential just a little bit to shoot, I think there's a real reason in like what I consider a starless draft to have him as the number 1 pick.
Do you, saying those things about him, do you see some Evan Mobley in his game, maybe minus the passing?
Yeah, that's actually who I've likened him. I've started writing my reports. I haven't finished, so I haven't released that, but I had my comp as a little bit of watered down Evan Mobley. I think Evan Mobley's a better prospect if you looked at them at the same stage,
Mm-hmm.
but I think their body type and their development are very similar. Mobley's done a great job on Paolo Banchero in the playoffs as we're watching right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you also can see like, hey, he's considered like, oh, he hasn't progressed the same way you'd like, but he's been consistent about 16 points a game for 3 straight years in his first 3 years. I don't know why that's seen as a negative. Like, I think that's a positive in this type of draft that we're getting this year.
I 100% agree. Let me ask you a question. I've done research. I've watched film on Sarr. I have one concern, and maybe it's just me, I don't know, tripping. I feel like his hands could really improve, especially in traffic. Is it just me, or are you seeing that as well?
I actually listened to you and Raphael discuss that and then watched for it. And so I had a little bit of a confirmation bias, but I do think that's a real thing. I think I have faith he'll figure out how to catch the ball, as simple as that sounds, better in the NBA, just to further development. Like I go to a bunch of Jazz games. I work for the team and I watch Walker Kessler and a bunch of those type of players that are big and young work on coordination drills. And I think his fluidity elsewhere in the game gives me faith that he'll be able to catch the ball and have that not be a glaring weakness at the next level.
See, I understand. I agree. It's like you see him, he's so fast. He can jump, run and jump, and then just something as simple as like catching the ball in traffic hasn't, it's not a positive for him yet. And again, it happened a lot early on. Maybe he improved on it as the season went on, but it's just something that like I couldn't unsee it as I continued to watch film on him. But I'm not going to argue against anything you said. I have him number one. I think it should be kind of like you said, a no-brainer in this particular draft, especially when you just saw Evan Mobley block Franz Wagner shot for the game. When like that looks like the mirror of what you project Sarr to be.
Yeah, I think Sarr has probably got this. Is probably the safest pick. Here's a guy that I don't think is necessarily safe, but if I look at the draft and I say how many of these guys can be a big time scorer in the NBA, there's not very many I point to. So my number 2 is actually Rob Dillingham, and I know that's higher than just about anyone. But my rationale, I'll defend it, and before we get into it too much, my rationale is I don't think he's Trae Young. I don't want to say that, but if you're to look at players in this draft that you think you could give the keys to your team and you say you're going to run our offense and you're going to score a lot of points, I think he's one of the very few, if not the only player in this class that within the first couple of years in the NBA can score 20 points and dish out 5-6 assists, maybe more. And I think that's honestly something he could do pretty darn quickly in the league and probably exceed those numbers. And I look at the rest of the class and I say, how many guys can get 20? And I know there's differing skill sets. And I know Trae Young's much maligned for not playing defense and his teams don't win at the level that you want. But in a class that I've deemed, I don't think as containing stars that are obvious. Like, yes, every year there's going to be someone. There's probably going to be someone in this class that ends up being an all-star and an all-pro player, but they're not jumping out of the screen to me. I might as well take someone that can be the face of my offense if everything goes right. Yes, defensively he'll have some ineptitude, but offensively, I think he's got a rare skill set. Like, I mean, he shoots 50% on catch and shoots 45%, and he didn't necessarily even take great shots at Kentucky. Like, he can get wherever he wants on the floor, at the rim, floaters, mid-range, step backs, and he's good in pick and rolls, yet his pick and roll bigs were not particularly good at Kentucky. So I think he'll thrive in an NBA system as a pick and roll point guard who's known to score the basketball. Defensively, I fully understand concerns there, but that's an upside pick for me.
Again, I'm not going to argue with you about that one either. I am a big Rob Dillingham fan. If you haven't watched or you don't know, like when he made his arrival in November, I was like, that is the guy right there. And again, I love the shot making. I think he was at like 38% off the dribble. Like, that's crazy. My only concern, and again, I understand defense, but like I mentioned when I'm on the podcast with my brother, I'm only asking my point guard to defend point guards and just give me the best effort that you have. I don't need you to be a multiple position defender. You're 6'1", 6'2", and $170 soaking wet. So I get it. And at the same time, we have 6-foot guards starting on playoff teams right now, playing 40 minutes a game. My biggest issue with Rob is that I think he's going to need to be more and less creative at the rim. He tries a lot of tough shots at the rim, and it just won't fly in the NBA because it's the best of the best. And he kind of got away with it some, but I don't think he was his best at the rim. But like, again, if you told me you were taking him number 2, I wouldn't argue. I have him number 5. And like, when I go back through and finish like my last big board at the end of this month here in May, I wouldn't be surprised if I moved him to 3. And I know that there are, just talking to my brothers, there are teams that love him. So that's my guy right there.
The more I think about it, and I don't think they're one-to-one players, but I had this discussion with a friend of mine. He sees him in a role similar to that of Darius Garland. I think they're different in the way that they score. Like Garland's a kind of a skill-based like he's not super quick, but he's got good moves and he gets back to jump shots and creates for his team. And now he's kind of playing out of place with Donovan Mitchell, handling a lot of those scoring duties. But I think you could, if you can imagine Garland having the keys to a franchise, that's kind of what you're getting Rob Dillingham with a little more excitement. I think he's like a juiced up Darius Garland in the sense, like he's kind of got this Energizer Bunny twitch to him and a little bit of like a, oh shoot, don't shoot that. And then he drains it. So I actually think he's got probably the highest scoring upside of anyone in this draft, but I just don't know if I want to take him above Sarr, who like I mentioned is the safest.
Hey, I 100% agree. I understand. Like I said, I've made Darius Garland comment. He's probably 15 pounds lighter at the same age, but I see it. And if nothing else, I had another comparison. I just dropped my mind, but like I'm a big Rob Dillingham fan. That the shot making is undeniable.
All righty. Coming up next, we've got a group of wings, kind of 3 through 5 on my board, 3 through 6, and we're gonna talk about those guys, see how James has them ranked, and if they're aligned with mine. Because so far we've been on the same page, and I didn't expect that whatsoever, but I was pleased to see it. But first, let me tell you about game time. So game time is something where if you're like me and you love NBA basketball, the playoffs are the season that you are waiting for, and game time can help you get the seats to those games. Like, I love playoff basketball and been lucky enough to attend many playoff games, both as a child and the last few years working for an NBA team. And now you guys can too with game time. Get your best seats. Game time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the game time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off, meaning you can wait and see if you can make the game with your busy schedule and not hinge everything and pay everything out of your bank account to make that game if it doesn't work. Like, you can wait till the last second and still get a great experience that's not marred by paying a fortune. Prices on the game time app get lower. That's amazing. And also, you can get those killer last minute deals on all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. And they'll take that guarantee very seriously, give you an 110% refund if they do not match it. And that's awesome. Game time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. On game time, there are last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals, and importantly for me, they're easy to find and buy MLB tickets with views from the seats in the venue. So when I'm in Chicago at the Combine, I'm going to get myself some tickets to a ball game using game time. And I'll be making sure to see the seat view to get the best seat in the house, because on game time, I can get a panoramic view of my seat in the app before I buy that, and so can you. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On NBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All righty, welcome back into Locked On NBA Big Board. It's Leif Thulin and James Barlowe on Big Board. We're discussing my Big Board, but first, let me make a little disclaimer. Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN and on your TV all day, but you have to turn down the volume because you hear all that shouting and monotony? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All righty, James. So we agreed through 2 picks. I didn't expect that even. So this is where we're going to start getting a couple of our discussions that turn into debates. So my 3 through 6 are all what I would consider big guards or wings, and I guess that just kind of depends your definition, but I'll read them off here and you take it however you want. Okay. I got number 3, Ron Holland. Nikola Topic is number 4. Number 5 is Matas Buzelis, and number 6, Cody Williams. What do you make of that grouping, that quartet, and then tell me where you want to go with it?
All right, so let's get right to it. Why not Stefan Castle?
I think that he has a very real chance of infiltrating this group, but the reason right now he is at 7, so he's not far out,
right,
would be that I think UConn does an excellent job of maximizing their players, and that sometimes means, okay, well, maybe he could have done more had he not been an excellent team, and that's what a lot of people are saying. But I think there's a flip side of that. I think the fact that they had Tristan Newton playing the point guard made sense. He was a senior. He was a first-team All-American. But does that mean I guarantee Stefan Castle can play the point guard at the NBA level? Does that mean because Stefan Castle was kind of the dare shooter for UConn that I think if he's not the dare shooter and excellent at slashing, that he can play a role as a normal shooter that's not a kind of a defined slasher playing the exact role that Andre Jackson invented out of necessity last year when UConn was losing games? It was like, we can't space the ball. So they found this cutting role for a wing in Andre Jackson, who's an excellent creator. Now, I have no doubt in Stefan Castle being able to attack the rack, finish at the next level, defend a couple positions. I think my doubts hinge on how many points a game he can score for you and create for you. So I'm not saying he has to be a 20-point scorer to be worthwhile the pick, not at all. but I think he doesn't necessarily have the creation skills that I have seen, and it's more theoretical and imaginative than what I've seen demonstrated, because UConn's offense is such a well-oiled machine that sometimes the reads are easy for Castle when he catches it in coming towards the paint, and then a guy helps, he throws a lob to Klingon, or he kicks out to Caravan. I just think that he's been maximized to a point that I have a little bit less faith of the individual becoming the guy that you're trying to pick in the top 5, so to speak, versus, okay, he's a really good role player. And the last guy he reminds me of was Anthony Black, who I was pretty high on throughout the year. I started thinking about it and I got lower. And then I was like, you know what? I really like him. Well, he's on a playoff team, so I won't be too hard on him. But a lot of the negatives that you say with Castle and Black are similar, because they both don't shoot the ball well. They both make a lot happen going to the rim. But how much of a role can you have on an NBA that's prioritizing shooting if that's what's the biggest glaring deficiency? So that would be my pitch as to why, but I'm still overall pretty high on him.
Got you. All right, let me ask you another question. Why Holland over Topic? And again, I know the difference between 3 and 4 is whatever, but why?
My rationale between the two would be that Holland, if he's not going to be your scorer, I have faith that he can be a stopper. I have faith that he can be a slasher that's valuable. And I know that's not typically what you want to pick. Like, I've been on here for the past 2 years, and I say, if you're taking in the top 3, you want a franchise-altering talent. Well, I don't think there are franchise-altering talents in this. Like, I was very firmly Banchero over Jabari Smith for this reason. Jabari might be a better role player in college, and his role may, like, produce into what you want in the NBA as a role player, but Banchero has more star potential. I don't believe that's the case in this sense, because if it was star potential, I think Topic may have the highest. If he hits, he might have the highest ceiling of anyone in this draft, in my opinion. I just think that it's harder for him, if he doesn't hit, to have a valuable role in the NBA. I think he's an on-ball guy who struggles to shoot, and if his lack of burst that I've seen at times, though he's been dealing with some nagging injuries in the European leagues, displays itself, he's got a less bright future in terms of, like, floor. Like, his ceiling could be really high, but his floor becomes lower. And I think Holland's floor is high because he can contribute on both ends of the floor as a slasher, can be on the ball a little bit, decent passer, in my opinion, and he rebounds the ball aggressively as well. And yes, his shot's a question mark, I'm fully aware, but I have more faith that if an off-ball player can develop the shot than someone who's on the ball and projects, that's their best role.
So on my big board, the biggest difference, I guess, that we have between the two, and we have a lot of similarities, it's a big difference. I have Topic number 2 because I'm buying the size, the playmaking, the vision. Again, the biggest question mark and what's stopping him from, like you said, becoming the best player in this draft 4 or 5 years down the line is the jump shooting. But I'm buying his touch. I think he was at like 90% from the foul line. So he has touch. He's not shooting off his palms, but I also understand that shooting threes and shooting free throws aren't the exact same thing. So you had, just real quick, I have Sar number 1. I have Topic 2. I have Castle 3. I have Holland 4. And I have Dillingham 5. But again, they're not nothing crazy, like, as far as what's off between our two big boards. It's interesting talking to my brother, who, I do the majority of my podcast with. He's not as high on Ron Holland as we are, and I like Ron Holland. I'm buying his first step. I'm buying his motor. He did get better as the season progressed, and I think his shooting will improve. I don't necessarily think that he is a 20-point per game guy like he was for that G League Ignite team, but I just see a lot of similarities at this age in RJ Barrett. So to me, RJ Barrett, what does RJ Barrett do best, or what did he do best coming out of Duke? Get to the basket. Yep. Didn't have a crazy handle. He made enough jump shots. He was a better playmaker for that Team Canada team, but he could make plays. Now he is a better playmaker now at this age than Holland is, but I just see similarities in their game. And again, I have Holland number 3. And if you tell me I get RJ Barrett out of this draft, I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, so the only difference for those of you trying to keep track at home is I have Sar 1, Dillingham 2, Holland 3, Topic 4, Buzelis 5, and then Williams 6, and then Castle 7. So Castle's the only one of James's board that's infiltrated the top 5 that I didn't have. So let's talk quickly about Buzelis and Williams. And the main thing I want to address is Buzelis came into this year, I think, most people's favorite to go 1. I was personally Holland ahead of Buzelis. And honestly, if you mix them, you might get the perfect like number 1 candidate, because I think they've got like they're foils against one another. One's a really good slasher who's an aggressive player. The other one's got a lot of skill and is a little bit less tenacious attacking the rim. He's more reliant on footwork and guile. But you would say, and then the last point about Holland would be, you would say, well, then Buzelis is a better shooter, and he may well turn out to be, but percentages would indicate that Holland and Buzelis are aces. They're 1-1. Right. So I think the appeal for Buzelis is that he's 6'10", 6'11". He can handle the basketball, and yes, he may not be your number 1, which is what you're projecting if you're picking him number 1. But if you're not picking him number 1, he falls to, let's say, 5 to 8. I think you're thrilled to get someone with that level of accomplishment with the ball in his hands at that height. Like, you have positional size, you have potential for shooting ability, and you have the ability to create out of secondary. Even if he's not the primary guy on your team, he can be a secondary scorer and a secondary facilitator. So that's why I still have top 5 stock for Buzelis, even though I've seen many prognosticators have him lower.
I have him 7, so
not much lower.
Yeah.
So is that all track? And then what would the difference between he and that same appeal of Buzelis be for Cody Williams? Because I think those two are pretty darn similar. They're both a little bit like guile reliant. They shoot floaters. They're not very physically strong, but they both have good coordination. They're both lanky and have defensive flashes at the very least because of that size at their position.
So I have Cody Williams number 9, and I'm on the fence with him. Is like, do I like him or do I really like him? And at early on in the season, I felt like I questioned his, I guess you could say, his motor. And again, I understand he's on a team with 2 other guys that are going to get drafted. Like, completely understand. Tristan Da Silva might be a first-round pick. Some people have him going really, really high. But I just felt like he didn't have the assertiveness that I would wanted to have seen from a top 5. He was the number 1 player in his class, right?
He was up there. It depended the scouting service.
Yes, I know it was high. So he did get it going. But I just, long term, I see how he moves. I see he's lanky, and I don't see a lot of like counter moves, change of direction from him. And I get that, he's still young. I almost think that because his brother is so good, we expect that same trajectory because he's further along than his brother at the same age. Ultimately, I think he will have to end up being, and I mentioned this with my brother, a Jaden McDaniels type that's going to defend at a very, very high level and make threes. I don't know if he is the point forward that, not you, but some people think he is. But I have like no issues, obviously, because I had him in I have him 9th, but I have no issues like taking him in the first round. I just trying to project what he is long term has kind of been difficult for me.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth. I had him as high as 2. Like, I hadn't actually compiled the board, but I'd kind of theorized I'd take him as high as 2. And my pitch was that he could be like Jalen Rose, which I know is before my time. Like, Jalen Rose's best year was my birth year. So that didn't really work. But I explained that with Raphael, and I explained, look, Jalen Rose wasn't a prolific scorer, but he could score.
Right.
He's tall, he distributed, and defensively he would compete. And even though he's not the athlete his brother Jalen Williams is, he can still be a plus athlete at the NBA level in the sense that he'll be 6'8", playing the 2 guard, and he can glide to the rim. He's got good touch developed on floaters. Now, if he gets stronger, that alleviates a lot of my worry about aggression, defensive ability. So I think he's a guy that, yes, I overhyped in my own head because I wanted him to be Jalen Williams. He's not that. They're not the same player. But I do think he can be a little bit more of an offensive threat than maybe you pitched with Jaden McDaniels, who anyone who listens to me on Locked on Jazz, I adore Jaden McDaniels, and that's my saddest miss from the Jazz. I wanted him so badly for the Jazz. So we'll get to the last end of my top 10, keep hashing it out coming up next. But first, let me tell you about Monopoly Go. In Monopoly, all right, game off. We got to pause to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there is just so much good stuff in the game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you can work together and build up each other's boards. The more you work together, the more you win together, and the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel with the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends. When you win, you can troll them with sending an emoji that they'll see and feel, oh man, he got the better of me this time. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and download it for free on Google Play or the Apple App Store. Game on. All right, welcome back into Locked on NBA Big Board. We're rounding out my top 10. We had kind of the same guys, similarly ranged, but just slightly different. So just to recap for those of you guys listening at home, my number 1 was Alex Sarr. My number 2 was Rob Dillingham. My number 3 was Ron Holland. 4, Nikola Topic. 5, Buzella. 6, Williams. 7, Castle. So we're technically on 7. We already discussed Castle. So we're going to skip to 8 through 10. My number 8 is Zachary Rees-Sachet. Number 9, Donovan Clingan. And number 10, Dalton Knecht. So, James, I turn it over to you. Which one of those do you either want to pick a bone with, or do you agree with, or maybe I'm too low, but you want to talk about the player? So take over from here.
All right. So my only person that I don't have. Oh, 2 questions. I have Clingan in my top 10. I have Zachary in my top 10. Now, where's Reed Shepherd at?
He's number 11, so he's not far out.
All right. So that's fine. Okay. Then question 2. Why is Dalton Knecht at 23 years old on draft night a top 10 pick?
All right. Here's the pitch.
That's like the only thing we don't see eye to eye on right now.
See, my pitch for Knecht over Shepherd and just as a top 10 in general would be Knecht has a skill set that I think is really desirable right now. And that is with the new CBA agreement, teams are going to want players who can contribute sooner in order to develop some of their younger players. So I don't think his age actually factors much against him. Mm-hmm. Like the prime example of this would be Jaime Jaquez. Jaime Jaquez is just as old, or maybe he was a year younger when he came out, but he's now at the same age and he's playing playoff minutes. Now, you don't know that's the case for Knecht, but what you can say is in the SEC, which is the most athletic league in the country, he dominated. His numbers even went up from out of conference play to conference play. In the biggest games, he scored a ton. He scored 37 against Purdue in the Elite Eight. And aside from all of that, I'm not expecting him to be some take over the game scorer that he was in college. Like that's the misnomer when people look at him. They're like, oh, you're taking him to be a scorer, but he's 23. I'm not saying you're doing that, but just to dispel that notion, what I think Knecht is he's someone who is going to take advantage of open shots. He's going to create gravity when he's on the floor. People are going to say, we got to run him off the line. He's a good enough athlete to put pressure on the rim, attacking closeouts. And I think though he was a bad defender in college, he played on the best defense or second best defensive team in the nation. So I think he's picked up good tendencies. He just had to carry such an enormous workload offensively that he was allowed to slack off defensively for Tennessee because that's what they needed. They needed him to score and the rest to defend. So I think what he can do is he'll be a specialist shooter who comes off pin downs, but he adds more value than just someone who comes off pin downs and shoots. Like he's more than Jordan Hawkins was, and I loved Jordan Hawkins. Jordan Hawkins is a pure dead-eye shooter and probably a better shooter than Knecht, but Knecht's a 41% three-point shooter, someone who off the catch is an excellent shooter to the point where he's in the upper 40s off the catch, unguarded, and contested. He's also pretty good. And then he can put the ball on the floor. He jumps pretty well off 1 foot towards the rim, and he's not your prototypical just like Duncan Robinson, catch and shoot off a curl, hope he can contend defensively, and only would work with Miami Heat where they build this thing. I think he can be someone who can defend adequately, not well, but adequately, and try hard, knock down open threes, and be a supplementary scorer if everything pans out. So in a class that lacks defined roles, this is someone that I think has a defined role he could star in.
This man's a salesman. Okay. So, is there a situation where he is asked to do too much and it not work out for him?
Absolutely. That would be my fear. I think the
Any
way I
teams in
construct
mind?
not off the top of my head, but the way I construct my board is typically this is how I can see this player playing, and this is the way it's possible. Rather than thinking, okay, well, here's where the shortcomings fall, because I think that's a drafting error by the team, not necessarily the player.
Mm-hmm.
He in that sense, he kind of reminds me of like Luke Kennard. They're different players, but Luke Kennard was drafted by the Pistons, and they didn't really give him a role to have. Like I think Knecht is a better athlete than Kennard. Kennard's probably a slightly better shooter, but the reason that I bring that up is you say, is there a team that he could have shortcomings on? Absolutely. I think he's a guy that needs to go to a good location, but I don't hold that against him in terms of how well he can play, because I think if different players went to different places, there's a lot of players that I think could have had very different careers that end up solid. Like Wiggins in Minnesota is an example at number 1. I don't think that was a well-built team for him down the road. And he went to the Warriors and he was used in a different way. Aaron Gordon with the Magic was used differently for Denver, and now he's one of those really good players. So I tend to just base it off my evaluation of the player as it is, rather than what I think they could be. But I do think he's a guy that needs a team that prioritizes him in a specialist role, as opposed to like, oh, here you go, here's the ball.
All right, so let me ask you a question here. Where is Jalen Tyson at on your big board without teasing where the rest of your guys are?
Jalen Tyson's about 20. I'm pretty high on Jalen Tyson. I did a podcast with Raphael about January 1st, and I talked about him and Baylor Shireman being top 25 guys, well ahead of when I think that's becoming more mainstream. So I do like him. I think Knecht is a little bit more dynamic as a scorer than Tyson, but this is no knock on Tyson.
I have them flipped exactly. So I have Jalen Tyson. I think I had him 12, and I had Knecht 20. So I just feel like I think Jalen Tyson. I think Knecht is I think he's a very good athlete. The athleticism pops. I just like Tyson better. I feel like Jalen Tyson is more than I think Knecht is a scorer more than a shooter, but I think Jalen Tyson could like be sneaky, like more than just a scorer. He'll be able to do both, I feel like, easily. And I won't necessarily say he's not team proof, but I feel like regardless of where he goes, he's going to find success because he's had success playing both the spot up guy at UT and then the dynamic scorer at Cal. In my mind, I would love to see him go to Sacramento because I feel like that fits a need there. But I was curious on the Knecht. Like I said, I like him. He showed me some pretty good playmaking too in that Purdue game, like some pick and roll stuff. So I can definitely buy him. Again, he's somebody he's like moved down, or I should say he's moved up, and I had him like 15 to 20, and then it's just a matter of putting it together for the rest of the guys. Was there another question? I think that's all the questions that I had. Like Knecht. Okay.
I got one for you real quick.
Go ahead.
That's all right. Okay, so Zachary Risachet early in this process was seen as a top 3 guy. I have him at 8. I think that'll get some pushback. What's your take on Risachet? Because I'll admit I'm a college basketball guy. I watch all the international players. I do, but just not as much as I watch the college players. So what is your take on Risachet as to, and is it crazy that I have him at 8, or I think it's becoming more and more commonplace to see him lower when he was a top 3 guy pretty much unanimously leading into, I'd say, even February.
I have him at 10. And I think the highest that I had him, and it was just undeniable. He was shooting like 48% from 3, but I think I had him at like 5. And my question has always been, what does he do when the shot isn't falling? When we first started the draft cycle, and my brother, I watched some of his film, and his film from, I think it was under 18s. It just wasn't good. And I was like, what's the difference between like, and it's probably a scorching hot take now, but I was like, tall, not as skinny, but, athletic, good in transition, can't create his own shot. And it looked like Corey Brewer to me. Now, that may sound crazy because we see Corey Brewer play for a bunch of teams, but like, Ricochet is going to be taller and he's going to, weigh out physically. Probably end up playing the four. It's just a different NBA time. But I just have trouble taking a guy in the top 5 who can't create his own shot and is not a playmaker. And he's just so jump shot reliant. And I've had questions about him before. I see other people's mocks. I usually just use them to like make sure I didn't forget somebody. But like I just haven't been as high on him as everyone else. And if you told me in a perfect world where, and again, I don't know, Keyshawn George, like you tell me he has more upside than Keyshawn George, I question that. I'm a big Keyshawn George fan.
I am as well.
See some Kyle Anderson there, with a better shooting Kyle Anderson as far as like just big guy that can handle. If you told me that Isaiah Collier ends up being a better player long term, I wouldn't doubt that either. We talked about Jalen Tyson, so
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. I had him 8 in this. And when you make a board and you're like, okay, maybe next time this is where this guy's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
I toyed with the idea of putting him 11, Shepard 10, and keeping Clingan because, but I kept him there just because I was like, you know what? I'm watching these playoffs and I see a guy like Michael Porter Jr., Trey Murphy being invaluable as off the ball catch and shoot guys.
Mm-hmm.
And if he can shoot like he did for the first half of that season and his stroke looks good, the mechanics are good,
right,
then there's a way. So I've kind of waffled, but I am, like you said, I'm trending a little bit lower on Reece Sachet because for the same reasons. I like someone who's got an ability to create their own shot if I'm going to pick them that high. But maybe this year I have to alter my methods, just like I mentioned with a couple of the guys earlier, just because I have tempered expectations. Well, it's been fun discussing this big board. Hopefully more discussions on the big board between James, myself, and everyone on the big board. But I gotta give you one last disclaimer of something else you guys got to listen to. That's Locked On launching their first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Well, it's been a pleasure going through the big board. We'll be back soon with more big board and debates like today. Appreciate your time, James, and I can't wait to be back with you. And that'll do it for us. And make sure to tune into Locked On NBA and listen to their playoff analysis coming up next.